Hey you guys and gals, Effie here. Today we are reviewing The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci, and I have so much pet help, I don't even know what to do. First we're going to talk about some things that I like, then we're going to talk about some things I don't, and then at the end we'll do a quick recap of, the pros and cons and whether or not I think you should buy the book. If you're looking to avoid spoilers, you're going to need to fast forward to the end to the recap, and I'll go ahead and link that down below. I also tend to do these recaps on TikTok, so if you want to just see the little short brief, make sure that you follow me over there. Of course, all of my social media is down in the bottom. Alright, on to the book. The Savior's Champion is a romance with fantasy elements. It's sort of overlaid with modern dialogue in a Bridgerton meets Hunger Games mashup sort of situation. At first I found the modern language and the modern values sort of overlaying the medieval scenery to be a bit jarring, but once I accepted that that was just the style of the book and that it was written that way on purpose in order to make it a little more hip for a younger audience, I guess. Do people say hip anymore? Anyway, so as soon as I accepted that that's just how the book was written, it was a lot easier to digest and it didn't bother me as much, probably about a third of the way through the book. The general story follows a young man who is, of course, a farm boy of sorts, who winds up thrust into this savior's tournament or sovereign's tournament where they are competing in a bloody, brutal battle where everybody dies in order to win the heart of the savior, who is this sort of godlike queen character that rules their empire and has for generations. It's an interesting concept. I think that there were some parts of it that could have been better executed, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about some things that I liked. I found the challenges to be creative and varied. Even the old tried and true battle to the death still had some nuance to it. It still had some variety to it, and that made it entertaining. I also appreciated that you didn't lose characters every time they went into a challenge. Even the challenges that you thought, like, oh, we're gonna lose some people here, sometimes you didn't, and that kind of kept you on your toes, and it kind of kept you in a, oh, are they gonna die? The dogs are helping. Are they gonna die? Are we gonna lose our friends? It just kind of kept the tension high, and I really liked that. And while I wouldn't say that any of the challenges were particularly groundbreaking or inventive, except for maybe the one with the pigs, they were presented in a new and interesting way, and that made them entertaining. Contrary to many of the reviews that I've seen, I actually liked the abbreviated world building, or the sort of narrow focus world building that we got. Within the first couple chapters, everything that you need to know about the world that we're entering. So you know that Tobias is a farm boy, you know that they live in a largely agrarian society that has a monarch that's a goddess or whatever it is that she is, some sort of healer magic thing, and then you wind up in this tunnel underground, and that is where the character is, so that is where we are with him. And it stays with Tobias. People come in and out of this labyrinth. They call it a labyrinth, it's really just a tunnel. But Tobias is trapped within it, and we are trapped there with him. And then once he gets out, he rushes through this garden that's incredibly dangerous, and it feels dangerous when she writes it. The way that she writes it feels dangerous. And then we're stuck in a palace. And although the palace felt, glitzy and glamorous and golden and rich, he's still trapped. It's still a prison. And because she never leaves those scenes, because we never get out of the labyrinth or we never get out of the palace, we are trapped with the character. And I feel like that was intentionally done, and I appreciated that she didn't go into, oh, the sun is a pink because he's underground, he can't see it, or they have this fantastic antelope that tastes like strawberries, or whatever it is that you think this fantasy world needs. We never get to experience any of that because Tobias never gets to experience any of that. And she's left that sort of more open world building reserved for later books when they get out. And it's sort of the promise that he will escape this. Of course he's going to escape it. He's the hero of the story. And of course that there's extras by the time you read it. There's always going to be extras. So he's always going to escape, and that at some point Tobias will be out in the world and you'll get to experience the rest of the world with it. So I liked the narrow focus world building. I thought that it was well applied and intentionally applied and well done. The cast of characters in this book is pretty massive. We have a lot of people in and out. There's 20 or so guys stuck in the labyrinth. There's a whole cast of courtiers and people in the palace, and then of course there's the savior and all of her court, I guess you would call them, all of her handmaidens and whatnot. So there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of moving pieces. I do wish that we got to spend more time with some of the contenders, so that it wasn't just like, oh, you know, hello. Sorry. I do wish we got to spend more time with some of the contenders. You know, some of them were really colorful, you know, the intellect or the dog or the hunter. And then some of them were just kind of like, oh yeah, it's asshole number 4 from the left. You know, it just, I wish there was more to some of them, but the ones that she spent time on were really well done. The magic system in this world is soft, meaning there's not really a sense of clearly defined rules or parameters within which the magic has to operate. And while that will bother some people, I feel like it was done on purpose. A lot of the time people think that soft magic is like, oh, it's plot magic, you know, you apply it whenever you need it to get the guy out of harm's way and to save our characters. And although there was some plot magic going on in the story, I also felt like it was intentionally without boundaries, because our savior didn't know necessarily what the boundaries of her magic were. So I got the sense that this kingdom has been at peace for generations, right? They haven't needed to use the savior's magic for anything significant for hundreds of years. So it's possible she didn't really know what all she could do, other than, you know, myths of old, which of course are going to be passed down and things are going to get lost. So she may have had a rough idea. Sorry about the dogs walking in the background. She may have had a rough idea of what she might have been able to accomplish, but I don't think she really understood the boundaries of her own magic. And because she doesn't understand them, we aren't privy to that information either. That doesn't mean there aren't boundaries. It just means we haven't seen them yet, or we haven't run into them yet. I'd also like to point out that her magic wasn't infallible. There were situations where her magic actually caused harm. So every time she touched Tobias, she left these sort of glowing fingerprints on him. And although this was a blessing, it made him faster, it made him more battle ready, it made him better able to fend off danger when it came, you know, quicker, more dexterous, etc. It also marked him in a way that could be seen by other people in certain situations, and that made him a target, because remember, this is a competition and only one person survives. So roughly, only one person is supposed to make it out, only one person can be the champion, only one person can marry the savior. And so it's a fight to the death for this huge fantastical prize. And her marking him, her blessing him, even if it was done unintentionally, and I think that it was sometimes, put a target on his back, you know. So this guy that she's falling in love with the whole time, spoilers, she falls in love with him, of course she does. You know, this guy she's falling in love with, she's also condemning him to death by sheer dint of the fact that she can't keep her hands off of him. So I liked the sort of naivety that she had about her own magic, and I'm interested to see how that plays out and how far that expands before we do run into barriers, if there are any barriers at all. Let's talk about some things I didn't like or things I thought could have been better done. All books have flaws. Here's a few of this ones. Number 1, I feel like this book was mismarketed. I think a lot of the people who have given bad reviews on the book were expecting an action adventure book, and that's not really what they got. What they got was a youthful romance. The characters are meant to be 20, they act more 16 to 18. So it's really a love story, and then it has a backdrop of this tournament. It's really, you know, Tobias and Layla sort of doing the cutesy smoochy face thing, and then in the background is all this danger and violence. And it's a harsh contrast, and that's great if you like that sort of thing. But if you're going into it expecting that it's just the tournament, and then at the end he gets the girl, and, you know, we all live happily ever after. If you're expecting like a hero story, that's not what you're going to get. And I think it was sold as a hero story, and it really should have been sold as a love story. Number 2, the surprise ending was super obvious, and although it didn't necessarily detract from my overall enjoyment of the book, or not to any substantial degree, it certainly gave me some sort of eye-rolling moments while I was going about it. I would have liked a little more subtlety for it, but again, I feel like this book was written for a younger audience. I'm 40, and I feel like the target audience was probably around 18 to 20, 18 to 22, and I don't know, maybe they wouldn't have picked up on it as fast, but it was really obvious, and I think subtlety would have been a better approach here. Issue number 3. Tobias did not feel grounded in his culture. He felt very much like an outsider. He wasn't faithful in their religion. He didn't really, I don't want to say he didn't believe in the Savior, but he was really disrespectful about the Savior in a way that doesn't make sense for a young man who grew up in a rural village with inside of the palace, you know, and he knows that this mythical woman lives in this palace and that she has magic and she is the thing holding the realm together and she's right there, and he grew up in the shadow of the palace, and his disdain for the Savior just does not make sense for somebody who grew up in that culture. You know, it's a medieval culture, and his almost militant atheism, if you want to call it that, just didn't feel natural or real. It would have made more sense to me had Tobias been an outsider or an interloper. Maybe he came from some other kingdom into this kingdom and participated in the thing. Okay, that's fine. I can follow that. I can follow his disbelief in the Savior. But for somebody who grew up there, it just didn't make a lot of sense. Issue number 4. Remember when I talked earlier about the huge cast of characters that we were dealing with? Because there were so many competitors and sorry. Because there were so many competitors, some of them sort of get lost in the shuffle. When I say some, I mean most. About 2/3 of them. They're just kind of, like I said, you know, jerk number 4 on the left, and there should have been more to it than that. If the cast had been narrower, either fewer people got in, or fewer people made it through the first challenge, which they shouldn't have all lived. They didn't know what to expect, and then all of a sudden they just figured it out. It didn't make sense to me that everybody survived the first challenge, right? So to me, about half of them should have been killed off coming out the gate, and then we could have been left with the ones that were interesting. So anyway, so you wind up with like half a dozen or so characters that are memorable, and everybody else is just sort of cannon fodder. And if the cast had been narrowed down to maybe those 6 or 7 individuals, they could have been better developed. Rather than trying to talk about 20 guys, let's talk about 6 and make them really interesting and really punchy. And I think that that would have better served the story she was trying to tell. Issue number 5, the dialogue was really sophomoric in some places. Aside from the male character's universal obsession with breasts, which I didn't really understand, I've never heard adult men speak to each other the way that these guys talk about women. And although I wouldn't be privy necessarily to the private conversations of men, I do live with men, and they also agreed this is not how men talk to each other. Teenage boys? Maybe. Frat boys with sort of stunted emotional development? Yeah, okay. But men who were supposed to, like for example Tobias, men who were supposed to, you know, be coming of age, be adults in their society, that are meant to be taking on the mantle of responsibility, that are meant to be moving towards, we're going to run this nation, we're going to run this empire. These guys are supposed to be mature for their age. They're supposed to be grown-ups, and they're not acting like grown-ups, and they're not talking like grown-ups, and it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Issue number 6. There are times when Tobias had massive personality shifts that kind of came out of nowhere. Like, for example, in the arena fight with the giant. Up until that point, he'd been this sort of surly loner who didn't really talk very much, and then all of a sudden he's in the arena, figures out he can teleport around due to this blessing, and he becomes this sort of jester, joker, you know, very glib, putting on a performance for the audience, and it's completely counter to the Tobias we have seen up to that point. And then the Tobias that we get after goes back to his original grumpy, gloomy, sour self, if you will. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. That does happen a couple times, not just for him, but for other characters as well. It's most notable to me in that arena scene. I would have liked to see more consistency. If you wanted to make him sort of a joker and you wanted to make him sort of overtly sarcastic like that, just write it into the rest of his dialogue, or while he's in the fight, just keep his personality consistent. I have a feeling what happened was the author was just having a lot of fun writing the scene. Can we not attack the mic with our tail, please? The author was just having a lot of fun writing the scene, right? So I think that's why we got that sort of shift. You know, she was just having a good time, and I get that. It was a lot of fun to read, so it must have been fun to write. I just would have liked to have seen more consistency. Guys, can you lay down, please? I have so much help. Issue number 7. The romance felt a little cutesy for me. More like a high school romance than what I would expect from 20-year-old medieval age characters. By the time you're 20 in that age, you know, you're already an adult. You've already experienced a lot of life. Hello. You know, you've already gone through some stuff. People in that era lived in extreme hardship. Even the savior, who lives in a palace, has had her share of hardship. They wouldn't be this sort of giggly, naive, immature thing. You know, it just didn't jive with the sort of weight of the world that was meant to be resting on these characters' shoulders. Issue number 8, injuries were not honored. This is a massive pet peeve of mine. I think that actions should have consequences, and when they don't, i.e. the injuries don't actually restrain the character's movement, I get really frustrated. It just makes everything feel really shallow to me, and I don't particularly like it. All of Tobias's injuries, even the really major ones, I think he broke his leg at one point or got stabbed through the leg or something, and she just kind of fixes it by rubbing some oil on him. I understand she is this mythical, magical healing goddess, but it would have made more sense to me if the bone had taken longer to knit, or whatever it is that had happened to him took longer to fix. This is Jack, in case you were wondering. Anyway, so I would have liked to see the injuries be a little more persistent, or maybe a little more impactful to the story. As it was, she just he would get hurt, she would fix him, and then they moved on, and he was fine. You know, it didn't really slow him down, it didn't really cause him any real danger, it just didn't really impact the story, so why injure him at all? Okay, quick recap. The Savior's Champion is not some intense literary work that's going to stay with us for generations, but it isn't really trying to be. If you are looking for a quick read over a weekend and you want something that's fun and light and easy to get through, this might be your book. Don't expect heavy literature. That's not what this is, but it is enjoyable. And in my opinion, it's not badly written. I don't think this is a bad book. As long as you're not looking for something deep and meaningful and you're just going along for the ride, you might actually enjoy it. As it is, I have read this copy and I probably won't be keeping it, so if you are interested in winning this copy of The Savior's Champion, bear in mind it is a used book, I have read it, and another member of my family has read it. So it does have some coverware, you know, and obviously I've got sticky notes in here, I will take them out, but every now and then, you know, it mars the page just a tiny bit. So if you want this copy of The Savior's Champion, you can sign up for that on my website by subscribing to the newsletter. I promise I won't spam you, and I will never give away your information or sell it to any third party. It's just for my use so that I can communicate with you guys. Other things. I am writing a book, so if you're interested in learning more about that, definitely make sure you sign up to that newsletter. Of course, you can follow all of my social media down below. What else? That's it. Alright, thanks so much for watching. Have an excellent day, and I'll see you guys next time. Can you not lay down? Do you not fit there? Why are you laying on my seats?